At CareFM, you can choose the abortion care that works best for you. With in-person visits in Atlanta, Chicago, and the D.C. area, or medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. Some people feel more comfortable meeting with a provider in person and leaving either no longer pregnant or with pills in hand. Others prefer getting abortion pills by mail. Just fill out a short online form and, if eligible, your medication arrives in a few days in a plain package. When you choose abortion pills, Cara, our text-based abortion companion, is with you every step of the way, offering 24/7 support and answers whenever you need them. However you get care, CareFM will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carefm.org.
In Walmart's Who Newville, joy started to grow. For online-only savings sure to steal the show. Tech treats and toys so dazzling and new. Walmart Cyber Monday deal soon ready for you. It's online only with very little time to spare. December 1st will soon be here, so be sure to be there. The Who's are prepared. Are you ready too? A day packed with savings. Amazing! Who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
Get your mother-loving ears on because your big-time radio DJ's got news. PayPal lets you choose how you want to pay for all the stuff. With PayPal, I can pay in-store, pay online, or pay over time. What's that? You want this translated into song? I hope you're sitting down. You can pay your own way. You keep those ears on, you hear? Don't just pay, baby. PayPal.
Learn more at paypal.com.
I know all of the nobles of this time don't really have much sort of regard for human life, but it's just so unnecessary. You know, it's like you've caused this. You had one round of violence or several back in the late 1450s, early 1460s. You thought you'd settled that, but you're not happy. So let's do it again. And as I say, Edgecote is called the Welsh Flodden. The Battle of Flodden being where the Scots were wiped out. Edgecote is considered to be the Welsh equivalent.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of this 6-part special on the Wars of the Roses. Today, Edward IV emerges as the great new hope for the Yorkist cause now that his father, Richard Duke of York, is dead. Joining me are two historians, Derek Birks, the author of The Guide to the Wars of the Roses, and David Pilling, the author of Kingbreaker. You'll get 2 episodes a week, so hopefully you will emerge from August with a superior knowledge of a conflict that was an early civil war and which formed England for the next few hundred years. All the great characters are here: Henry VI, Elizabeth Woodville, Queen Margaret, Warwick the Kingmaker, Edward IV, Richard III, and finally Henry Tudor. Please do share and like and subscribe, but in the meantime, it's the Wars of the Roses Part 3, Edward IV. Derek, David, welcome back for the next part of our discussion on the Wars of the Roses. And this is, whilst the last episode covered, about 15 years, this is going to cover 2 years in around about the same time. So it's like nothing happens for a long time, then a lot happens in a very short time. So for the listeners' sake, we left them in 1468-69, and the key Battle of Towton was in 1461, and then so Edward IV is the king and the man of the moment. So Derek, can you just pick us up as to a state of play? Edward is Edward IV now in 1469.
Yeah.
Where is Henry VI?
Henry VI is in the Tower at this point. He's been captured in the previous years. And when you say somebody's in the Tower, it always sounds as if they're in a dungeon somewhere. But I'm sure Henry would have been in quite comfortable quarters in the Tower. Quite a lot of political prisoners in the Tower over the years were they're sort of under house arrest in a sense. They're not sort of chained to a wall or something. So he would have been there. Do you know, if I'm honest, I reckon Henry VI was probably as happy there as anywhere else. He's probably had books to read. He was probably quite content in some respects.
He didn't mind not being king.
Well, I think it was less hard work than being king for sure. He didn't warm to being king particularly. He did it out of duty. So it's interesting thought as to whether, I don't know that obviously for a fact, but I just sort of suspect he might be thinking, well, actually, this is a hell of a lot easier than what I have been doing.
Because he can read his books, he can pray all day, and
he should have been a monk, really, Henry.
Yeah,
pack him off to a monastery.
So then what happens then in 1469 that sparks off another round of bloodletting?
Well, I regret to inform you that we need to go back a little bit. I think that if the whole period 1469 to 71 for me is about Warwick. It's about Warwick's overwhelming ambition and his inability to accept being first among equals of Edward's councillors. When they say, don't you, you've got to win the war, but then you've got to win the peace. And I don't think Edward won the peace. To be honest, I would say this. I don't think it's entirely his fault. One of the big issues when any king comes to the throne is that he needs to marry. Edward, no exception. He's a young man of about 20, 21 when he comes to the throne, a bit younger, sorry. And he needs to marry. Everybody's telling him to marry. Warwick's telling him to marry. All his courtiers are telling him to marry. When he marries, they say, oh, not her. Don't marry her.
Well, this is the famous Elizabeth Woodville.
Yeah, I mean, everybody must have known at the time, unless they were in a hole somewhere, that Edward was a womanizer. He was very attractive to women, and he was very attracted by women. And Elizabeth Woodville was one of those women that he was very attracted to. If we're to believe what people tell us from the time, then it was the oldest story in the book. He was in love with Elizabeth Woodville. I suggest he was in lust with Elizabeth Woodville. Might have been in love as well. But he married her, I think, so that he could bed her. Now, possibly Edward thought, and this was all in secret, so possibly Edward thought that he might be able to winkle his way out of this later on and annul the marriage or something. But anyway, he didn't. And the problem with Elizabeth Woodville, there are many problems that people would point out and say, well, she wasn't really of noble birth. She had a massive family. She had grasping relatives. She was an ex-Lancastrian, and she was a widow. She already had 2 children by her previous marriage. So there's a whole catalogue of things you could level at her. But I guess you could say, well, it was his decision to marry her, not the other way around. She might have held out for it, but Edward, she gets what she can. She's the queen. So I don't think it was a great choice of a bride, but it needn't necessarily have been as destructive as it was. Warwick was very embarrassed by it because he was busy negotiating a marriage for Edward elsewhere in Europe. And of course, Warwick's esteem was called into question. His role in the whole reign was called into question because he liked to tell everybody on the continent that he was basically the power behind the throne. Nothing happened without his approval. Well, something had happened, and Europe was as surprised as anybody else.
So had they wanted some of their own candidates?
Oh, there was a number of. I think there was a princess from Savoy in Italy that was being negotiated with. I think possibly a French one as well. But I mean, you'd expect a king to marry into another royal family of Europe. That was fairly common. It was very uncommon for him to marry an English woman for lots of reasons, but principally because you would tend to raise up one baronial family above the others by bringing them into the royal family, and that could cause jealousies. I actually don't think, that much is made of that. I don't really think that's the main issue. The main issue is that it skewed the marriage market because Elizabeth had a lot of sisters and they needed to be found husbands, suitable husbands for relatives of the Queen. And there weren't, hundreds of eligible noblemen knocking about in England. So they did take some sort of prizes. Now, that possibly wouldn't have mattered at all, but for one tiny detail, and that's that the Earl of Warwick had no sons and 2 daughters. And for Warwick, the most important thing in his life in the mid 1460s was to get his daughters married to the best possible males that he could marry them to. And so he aimed for the top, being Warwick. He wanted Edward to let one of his daughters marry one of Edward's brothers, George, Duke of Clarence, or Richard, Duke of Gloucester. So Edward said flat out no. Now, politically, that was absolutely the right decision, because marrying Warwick's family into the royal family would severely weaken Edward's position. Bear in mind, Edward hasn't got a son as yet. So the heir apparent, the heir presumptive, the heir that the man likely to succeed is his younger brother George, Duke of Clarence, at this point in time. So if you're Edward, you're thinking, do I really want the Earl of Warwick's line married into mine? No, I don't.
And can I just ask, Derek, sorry to interrupt you, but Henry VI's son, Edward, is in France. Would he, if Edward IV died, surely Edward, son of Henry VI, would become the heir to the throne, or has he been back?
Well, he's been disinherited. I mean, I'm not sure that the Act of Accord was ever repealed. So in theory, I'm assuming he was disinherited, but in practice, that wasn't going to happen anyway, because, clearly the Yorkist heavies would want to make sure that one of theirs was in power. And it was, I think, generally accepted that Clarence was the man in pole position.
I see.
And I think Edward had actually rewarded him with lots of lands to increase his prestige and power, so that he would be, if anything happened to Edward, he would be a possible, a suitable successor.
And then there's a younger brother still who we have not yet mentioned.
Do we have to?
Not at the moment, we don't. We can have lots of fun with him later.
Okay, all right. Well, we won't even mention his name, but listeners do email in.
I mentioned his name a few
You did.
Did you?
Oh,
yeah.
Richard, Duke of Gloucester. I've said it again now.
I get a kind of twitch.
Okay, well, we'll resume. Yeah. Yes, we'll resume. And there's plenty of time to talk about him later. So, right, you were halfway through before I rudely interrupted.
I was making the point about the marriage market of the nobility and the fact that Warwick's options were very limited. If he couldn't marry them off one of his daughters to the king's brothers, the next best one to marry them to was the Duke of Buckingham, who was young, but he was probably the foremost peer in terms of his land holdings. He had a claim to the throne, all sorts of things. So that would be a good option. Unfortunately, Buckingham was married off to one of the Woodville sisters, so that option was shut as well. So I think Warwick was generally peeved with his position. Now, this is where I really don't like Warwick, because he's got everything. Edward has showered him with honours, lands, position. I mean, what is there not to like? Well, what there's not to like is what he hasn't got. So, he's that's his way, I think. It's his ambition. And so he starts in 1468, he starts to think, well, regime change might not be a bad idea. And he starts to cultivate George, Duke of Clarence. Now, I'm sure we'll talk a fair bit about George, Duke of Clarence later, but Clarence looks, we're told, very similar to Edward, and there the similarities end. He has very few redeeming qualities, let's say. He's a very flaky individual. And I think he's one of those people, the more you get to know him, the less you like him and the less you trust him. And I think actually, ironically, Warwick finds that too. He puts his support behind trying to get Clarence to replace Edward. And so Warwick is he's a very good plotter, actually. He has lots of strings to his bow. In 1468 and into 1469, he's planning rebellions in the north. He's encouraging people to rebel because it'll destabilize the regime. And he's also trying to get Clarence married to his eldest daughter, Isabel. So he's plotting away there throughout 68 and into 69.
Is he at Warwick Castle doing this?
He'll be all over the place.
No,
but,
he wouldn't be in London.
Castle,
Is
he would be some of the time. Yeah, I mean, Warwick was a key member of the regime. So I mean, and also he was a trusted man. So it's not as if Edward's thinking, well, any minute now, Warwick and Clarence are going to try and take my throne. They were I mean, Clarence and Warwick were so much a part of Edward's government that it was kind of unthinkable, perhaps, to see them as betraying him.
I find Warwick, particularly when you get to this point, a very tough read because, as Derek said, what has he got to complain about, really? And what is his end game? What's the outcome? Okay, he's not satisfied with some of the things Edward is doing, but it doesn't really, harm his position unless he makes a big deal out of it. And Derek was saying that he's plotting all over the place. He's got all of these conspiracies. And he just thought, well, why? Just be content, but he can't. And he doesn't want to be king. That doesn't seem to be Warwick's ambition.
No,
he just wants to be like this power behind the throne.
Where does his nickname come from? Is it
Kingmaker.
Applied then?
I think it's later, isn't it?
It's a bit later. I think it's first used not as the word kingmaker, but sort of maker of kings. I think in the 16th century. I think it's as late as that, possibly. And it doesn't really get taken up until much later on, 17th century, and then it becomes popularized in the 19th century.
But he's this perpetually dissatisfied person. He seems to be.
Yeah, I don't think we should forget that all of the nobility, virtually without exception, are looking at the lands they hold and where their family's going. And the problem, as I said, for Warwick is he's got no sons. Where his family is going is where his daughters go. So that is a really important thing. I don't think we can minimize the importance of that. But having said that, he's not the only nobleman with that problem. And as you say, he's been given a lot. What's he got to complain about? Well, I guess he thinks he has.
Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99, that's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show. But he's worried for his lands after he dies.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's got more land than anybody else, virtually. They say that you could walk on Warwick's lands from the south coast to the northern border and not have to go on anybody else's lands. His lands are so extensive across all of England. And when he dies, his inheritance will be split between the 2 heiresses, his 2 daughters, and he wants to try and control where that goes. And the other thing about... Sorry.
I was just going to ask, doesn't he also have a sister who he marries off to Oxford?
Does he have a sister? He has a lot of sisters, doesn't he?
Sorry. Don't worry.
I think there probably are. Yeah.
I mean, he sounds rather like John Dutton in have you watched the show Yellowstone? But he's obsessed with what will happen to his lands after he dies.
Sort of posterity. Yeah.
Yes.
A
strong motivating factor. So because I know often Wars of the Roses are applied to the fantasy drama Game of Thrones, but I guess this is something that many important men always worry about.
Absolutely, yeah. It's his succession. It's not the king's succession, but it's his succession.
I,
And
yeah.
when he dies, not only will his lands be split, but there are other lands he holds of the Neville family, which will be claimed by other members of the Neville, other branches of the Neville family. So he foresees the total disintegration of what he has actually single-handedly built in the 15th century. So I get that. I understand that. I can see where he's coming from there. I just think getting rid of Edward IV is not a very smart move.
No, and he must have predicted that if I move against Edward, there's going to be more bloodshed. There's no way this is going to happen bloodlessly, but he doesn't care.
I don't think he cares. No.
You know, there's this coldness. It's like, oh, let's trigger another round of violence and battles,
Yeah.
and as long as I get what I want and my posterity is secure, that's all fine. They're like, oh, nice. You know, even
1469 is quite appalling, really, because he, in the summer, he's got these rebellions on the boil, some of them led by his own retainers in the north. And there's one that's led by a sort of fictional person called Robin of Reedsdale.
Yeah.
Robin of Reedsdale is probably most likely to be one of Warwick's clients. Nobody's too sure which one, but
John Conyers.
John Conyers is in the frame, isn't he? And anyway, this northern rebel army they head south, and meanwhile Warwick goes to Calais, sneaks off to Calais with Clarence and his daughter Isabel, and they are married in, I think it's July 1469 at Calais, obviously against the king's express orders. He then comes back to England with a small army and proceeds to go to where this rebellion is being met by one of Edward's loyal and newly promoted earls, the Earl of Pembroke. And when the rebel army and Warwick's vanguard between them destroy the Pembroke army, which is outnumbered anyway, when they destroy that, he summarily executes the Earl of Pembroke, and he then goes on to execute the Earl of Devon, another loyalist, and he then goes on to execute Earl Rivers, the father of Elizabeth Woodville, and one of her brothers. Now, these guys, they're acting within the law. They're doing what the king's asked them to do, which is suppress a rebellion.
It's okay to want an abortion. Did you know 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have one? So it's actually more common than most people think. At Care FM, you can choose what type of abortion care works best for you. We have in-person locations with private entrances in Atlanta, Chicago, and the Washington, D.C. areas. And we also offer medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. For some people, it's more comforting to come into a private office where they can sit with one of our medical providers and either leave no longer pregnant or with abortion pills in hand. For others, they prefer to get abortion pills through the mail so they can decide the best time and place to complete the process. Getting abortion pills by mail from Care FM is simple. Fill out an online form, and a licensed provider will review your medical history. And if eligible, your medication will be shipped to you in a couple of days. Kara, our text-based abortion companion, will guide you through the process from start to finish with instructions, reminders, and answers to all your questions whenever they come up 24/7. With either choice, please know Care FM will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carefm.org.
But I think we should also remember that battle is the Battle of Edgecote.
Yes.
Apart from wiping out the leadership, in Wales, Edgecote is thought of as a national disaster because so many of the Welsh gentry were obliterated at the battle. I'm not sure of the figures, but hundreds were just mown down in a single day. And this is all the result of, you know, Warwick and Clarence's ambition.
Yeah.
And all of these, I mean, I know all of the nobles of this time don't really have much sort of regard for human life, but it's just so unnecessary, you know. It's like you've caused this. You had one round of violence, or several, back in the late 1450s, early 1460s. You thought you'd settled that, but you're not happy, so let's do it again. And as I say, Edgecote is called the Welsh Flodden. The Battle of Flodden being where the Scots were wiped out. Edgecote is considered to be the Welsh equivalent. And, you know, the results was temporary in political terms. And it's just so, it's for nothing, really. You know?
It's ludicrous, quite ludicrous, really. You could understand it in a way if this was a disaffected lord who'd been stripped of everything and was trying to make a comeback. But this is the guy who's the wealthiest person in the kingdom with more political clout than any other noble. It's ridiculous, really.
It's not attractive. It's not a good look.
No. And of course,
the death of Elizabeth Woodville. So it's just I noticed you mentioned the killing of Elizabeth Woodville's father.
Yes,
that feels like something significant that Edward IV cannot allow that to.
No.
Well, yeah. I mean, Edward IV is then sort of under house arrest after that. This is another hilarious story because Warwick says, "Right, I've got Edward." But
how did he get Edward? Was it just
well, because he had armies in the field. Edward's army under Pembroke had been destroyed.
I see.
And
right.
really, Edward was sort of.
I think Edward was caught napping. Literally,
yes.
They caught him in bed.
Yeah.
Well,
of course, the point is that as far as Edward was concerned, Clarence and Warwick were coming to suppress the revolt.
Yeah.
That's their story. It always is, actually, But so he was trusting that they were working for him, and then he found himself surrounded. But then Warwick doesn't know what to do. This is classic. He has Edward in the palm of his hand. If he wanted to put Clarence on the throne, he has to kill Edward. As simple as that. But he doesn't kill Edward. And what happens in those few months between July and September, I think, or maybe October, is that the government is in chaos. There is no king who's making decisions because Warwick's got him locked up, and nothing happens. No government moves forward. Orders can't be given. Important orders obviously can't be given. So you have the bizarre situation that when there is a Lancastrian rising in 1469, Warwick effectively has to let the king go so that somebody has the authority to muster troops. And so Edward basically kind of walks out and goes eventually back to London.
Well, this is what I mean by this renewed conflict being so pointless.
Yeah.
I mean, Warwick's achieved nothing.
I do feel
it's a lack of ruthlessness, isn't it?
It's a lack of foresight, I think. I mean, what are you going to do with Edward? I don't know.
Yeah. I personally, this is just a personal opinion, and I hinted at it earlier. I think Clarence seemed like a really good prospect until he got to know him.
Yeah.
And then he realised that Clarence would be a far worse option than Edward IV.
Yeah. How old is Richard at this stage? He
is by 69. He must have been about 17.
Well, he might have been another option.
But Richard was fiercely loyal to Edward.
Of course he was. Yes.
Great things. But yeah, so complete mess, really, in which a lot of people have been killed, as you pointed out.
And you've got two kings. You've now got two kings under lock and key. You've got one in the Tower, and then another. We've got two kings, but we don't have any kings. So yeah, great.
Yeah, you got two kings, but neither of them was actually in control.
So is Neville the Kingmaker effectively the sort of regent at this stage?
Not really, no, because nobody listens to him. He can't. He hasn't got. He tries to call Parliament, then realizes he hasn't got the authority to call Parliament because he's not king. There's nothing he can do because he hasn't got authority. If somebody had named him protector, then maybe it would be a different story. But he has no actual power.
Derek, can I ask you a question? It strikes me there's a parallel between what Simon de Montfort did when he captured Henry III. He didn't have any legitimate power either. So what he does, he dragged Henry around with him. And whenever a government order was issued, he made Henry put his seal to the writ. So all of the orders that went out in Henry's name were in fact Simon's orders. Why doesn't Warwick do this with Edward? Can he just not make Edward do what he
I was going to say, there's one answer to that. He's dealing with Edward IV.
Not Henry
Edward
III.
IV is nobody's puppet king.
Yeah.
He's just not going to do it.
But there is this. It is interesting that there is this level of there's the rule of law here, or there is a veneer of the rule of law in that, as you've just mentioned, they can't do anything without the king's seal, the king's approval. It hasn't descended into anarchy. It's more stasis, is it?
Well, it's just that it's a personal monarchy. So if you haven't got a monarch in control, who makes the decisions? Well, nobody really. There's no way that somebody else can make a decision. Even the council can't make important decisions without the king.
Because even if you get a regency council in this period, it's all under the authority of the crown. Like if the king is disabled or for whatever reason, you don't have this concept of like a lord protector who's independent of the sovereign.
Yeah.
So Warwick's in a bind, and it's one of his own making, really.
So how is the bind broken?
Well, as I say, he has to let him go basically because of a rebellion in the north, and Edward just resumes life as normal, goes back to the capital, takes control again. But the interesting thing is that he doesn't take any action at all against either Clarence or Warwick. Now that's I think quite interesting. The reason is fairly obvious, that Warwick is probably too powerful for him to actually better do much. It'd be a real gamble to say, right, I'm confiscating all your lands. That would certainly provoke Warwick again. And his brother, well, he gives him the benefit of the doubt, I suppose. But Edward has not forgotten what happened. He's merely in a position where he has limited options. And in fact, he still gives both of them lands and offices after that. He still rewards them. I mean,
is he playing
if you're Elizabeth Woodville, you're not very pleased, but
no, I'd imagine yes. She's so presumably, I guess, is there any evidence that Elizabeth Woodville would have been whispering in the ear of her husband that this is Warwick needs to be dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, there's a lot of hype around the Woodvilles and Elizabeth Woodville in particular, as if she's some sort of scheming person. I'd be very surprised if she didn't say something to Edward.
Yeah.
This is my father and brother that's been killed. What are you going to do about it? But I think Edward again was his own man. It didn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. You're not going to persuade him to do something unless he wants to, unless he thinks it's the right thing to do. And he probably decided, look, there'll come a moment which is better than this one to get some revenge and justice.
I think a lot of the negative image of the Woodvilles really stems from going a bit later, Richard III, and justifying what he did. You have to have you have to have villains, and the Woodvilles are convenient scapegoats. And like Derek, I don't think Edward IV, you couldn't manipulate him in that way. You can't push him around. And
I mean, whatever you look at in his life, in his reign, you can't see him being pushed around.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please share with friends and family, and if you want to get in touch, you can through X or email history@aspectsofhistory.com. But until then, thank you and good night.